A 72-year-old grandfather humming a hymn in a mall parking lot at sunset. Moments later, slammed against a car, innocent hands cuffed behind his back by a cop who chose to see a criminal. His crime? Buying slippers while black. One lie on a police report could destroy his life. Would the system believe him or the badge? His fight for justice starts. Now hit subscribe. More powerful stories like this coming. The late afternoon sun painted the sprawling Eastfield Mall parking lot in long, lazy shadows. It was that golden hour, warm but fading, the kind that made even the sea of cars look softer. Franklin Vance, 72 years young with hair like fresh snow and eyes that held the quiet wisdom of decades, pushed his cart towards his sensible sedan. The cart held a single, modest bag, a new pair of slippers for his aching feet, a small treat he'd allowed himself after a careful budgeting of his pension check. He hummed an old spiritual tune, a habit from childhood, a sound as natural to him as breathing. The mundane task of loading groceries felt peaceful. He'd lived a good life, a hard life sometimes, but a decent one. He believed in kindness, in patience, in the slow, steady rhythm of getting by. He believed people, mostly, were good. Today, that belief was about to be shattered like glass under a boot heel. Across the asphalt expanse, Officer Rick Dalton leaned against his patrol cruiser, boredom etched onto his face. His shift felt endless. He scanned the crowds leaving the mall, not with the vigilance of protection, but with the jaded cynicism of someone who'd seen too much of what he considered the wrong kind of people. His gaze, sharp and predatory, snagged on Franklin, an older black man, alone, loading a single bag. Dalton's mind, conditioned by prejudice and lazy assumptions, skipped logical steps. Asterisk suspicious. Too calm. Hiding something. Asterisk it wasn't a deduction. It was an instinct, ugly and deep-rooted. He didn't see a grandfather buying slippers. He saw a potential thief, a statistic waiting to be confirmed. He nudged his rookie partner, Ben Carter, a younger man whose eyes still held traces of idealism. "Watch this," Dalton muttered, a smirk playing on his lips. "Guy looks like he's casing cars. Or just boosted something small. But he folds quick." Ben shifted uneasily, but said nothing, the weight of Dalton's seniority pressing down. Dalton pushed off the cruiser, his posture radiating misplaced authority. He didn't walk, he stalked. The peaceful hum of the parking lot seemed to quieten as he approached Franklin. The friendly nod Franklin instinctively offered froze on his face as he saw the cop's expression. Not helpful, not inquiring, but hard, accusatory. "Sir," Franklin began, his voice calm but wary. "Can I help you, officers?" Dalton ignored the courtesy. He stopped too close, invading Franklin's personal space, his hand resting conspicuously near his holstered weapon. His eyes raked over Franklin, then the single bag in the trunk. "What you got in the bag, old-timer?" The term wasn't respectful. It was laced with condescension. "Just leaving them all? Bit quick in and out, weren't ya?" Confusion clouded Franklin's features. "Just my slippers, officer. Bought them maybe 20 minutes ago. Receipts right here." He started to reach slowly towards his pocket, movements deliberate to avoid any sudden scare. "Hands where I can see 'em," Dalton barked, the command sharp and sudden, shattering the fragile peace. Franklin flinched, raising his hands slowly, palms open. Fear, cold and unfamiliar, prickled down his spine. "Officer, I was just getting my receipt." "Save it," Dalton snapped. He grabbed the bag from the trunk, roughly spilling the new slippers onto the asphalt. He pawed through them, as if expecting hidden contraband. Finding nothing, his frustration visibly mounted. He needed a win. He needed to be right. Store security reported a theft. He lied, the words rolling off his tongue easily. Description matches you perfectly. Wallet? Jewelry? Something small and expensive? Where is it? Franklin's eyes widened in disbelief. Theft? Me? Officer, that's impossible. I bought these slippers, paid cash, spoke to the nice lady at the register. You can check the cameras. Inside the store, right there. He pointed a trembling finger towards the mall entrance. Dalton wasn't listening. The denial, The plea for reason only fueled his conviction in his own biased narrative. This old man was lying, playing the victim. He needed to assert control. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Now. The command was a hammer blow. Officer, please. Franklin's voice cracked, a mixture of fear and burgeoning outrage. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm 72 years old. His plea echoed in the suddenly charged air. A few shoppers had stopped, watching nervously from a distance. Ben Carter looked profoundly uncomfortable, shifting his weight, his mouth opening slightly, as if to intervene, but no sound came out. Dalton's authority was a tangible force. I won't ask again. Dalton roared, stepping even closer, his face inches from Franklin's. The threat was physical, palpable. Franklin, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, saw the futility of resistance. The cold dread of helplessness washed over him. With agonizing slowness, fueled by a lifetime of dignity crumbling in an instant, he turned and placed his weathered hands behind his back. The cold, hard bite of the metal handcuffs closing around Franklin Vance's wrists was a sound that seemed to echo across the parking lot. It was the sound of innocence being shackled, of prejudice made manifest. Dalton wrenched Franklin's arms higher than necessary, eliciting a sharp gasp of pain. Got him, Dalton grunted to Ben, a note of perverse satisfaction in his voice. Classic denial. They always play innocent. He shoved Franklin roughly towards the patrol car, ignoring the old man's stumble. Franklin's glasses slipped down his nose. He couldn't adjust them. Humiliation burned hotter than the fading sun on his face. He saw the faces of the onlookers, shock, pity, averted eyes. He saw Ben Carter look away, unable to meet his gaze. As Dalton pushed Franklin's head down, guiding him into the harsh plastic and metal confines of the back seat, the world narrowed to a nightmare. The door slammed shut with a heavy, final thud. Through the cage separating him from the officers, Franklin heard Dalton radio in, his voice dripping with false triumph. Dispatch, Unit 7. Got the suspect in custody for the Eastfield Mall theft. Elderly black male. Resisted initially, but secured. The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Franklin closed his eyes, the image of his new slippers lying discarded on the dirty asphalt seared into his mind. The spiritual tune he'd been humming died in his throat. Peace was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury he hadn't known he possessed. The journey to the precinct wasn't just a physical ride. It was the first, jolting step on a path where the only way out was through the fiery crucible of the law. The fight, though he didn't know it yet, had just begun, and the courtroom, that hallowed hall of justice, felt impossibly far away as the siren wailed, carrying innocence towards the maw of a system primed by prejudice. The fluorescent lights of the Eastfield precinct holding cell buzzed like angry hornets trapped in glass. They cast a sickly, green-tinged pallor over everything, leaching the color from the world. Franklin Vance sat rigidly on the unforgiving metal bench bolted to the concrete wall. The cold seeped through his thin trousers, a constant, unwelcome reminder of his predicament. The handcuffs were off, but the phantom pressure remained, cruel bracelets of indignity etched into his skin and soul. The cell reeked, a suffocating cocktail of stale sweat, cheap disinfectant that only masked deeper odors, and the pervasive scent of despair. Across the cramped space, a younger man muttered incoherently to himself, lost in a private storm. Franklin felt a century older than his 72 years. The raw shock of the parking lot had subsided, leaving behind a simmering, bone-deep anger and a chilling vulnerability that made his hands tremble slightly. He'd navigated life carefully, honestly. A speeding ticket decades ago was his only brush with the law. Now he was a suspect, labeled a thief, not because of evidence, but because of the color of his skin and the poison festering in a cop's heart. The booking process had been a dehumanizing blur. Fingerprinted like a dangerous criminal, the ink stubbornly clinging to the whorls of his identity. A mugshot taken under harsh, unforgiving lights, capturing his bewildered fury beneath the flash that seemed to freeze his humiliation for eternity. Officer Dalton had overseen it all with a grim, unsettling satisfaction. He'd made loud, pointed comments about cleaning up the mall riffraff and another one off the streets, his voice carrying clearly to Franklin's ears. Each word was a deliberate barb. Officer Carter, the younger partner, had handled the paperwork. His movements were stiff, robotic. He avoided Franklin's eyes whenever possible, a flicker of something, shame, discomfort, buried deep beneath the weight of the badge and his senior partner's influence. When Franklin, his voice raspy with suppressed rage, had demanded again to call his daughter, Lisa, Dalton had waved a dismissive hand, his expression contemptuous. Plenty of time for phone calls later, Pops. Let the process play out. Got paperwork to file. The dismissal felt like another door slamming shut. Hours crawled by, measured only by the relentless buzz of the lights and the occasional clang of a distant cell door. Franklin's mind replayed the parking lot scene on a torturous, unending loop. The warm golden sun, the innocent slippers lying discarded on the dirty asphalt like trash, Dalton's sneering face inches from his own, the sudden, brutal bite of the cuffs, the silent, watching crowd whose inaction felt like another wound. Each replay stoked the embers of his fury hotter. He thought of his late wife, Clara, her gentle strength, her unwavering belief in fairness. What would she say seeing him here? He knew. She wouldn't weep. She'd tell him to fight. Not with fists, but with truth, with the very system that had failed him. The cold bench beneath him felt like the anvil upon which his old life was being shattered, forging something harder, sharper. Finally, after what felt like an eternity trapped in the buzzing green hell, a bored-looking desk sergeant appeared at the bars. Vance? Your lawyer's here, and some woman says she's your daughter. Relief, sharp and almost painful, flooded Franklin. He stood, his stiff joints protesting, and shuffled towards the cell door. The sergeant unlocked it with a heavy clunk. Stepping into the slightly brighter, marginally less oppressive hallway, felt like surfacing from deep water. And there she was, Lisa, his daughter. Her face, usually bright and full of life, was pale, etched with lines of shock and worry that hadn't been there this morning. Her eyes, wide and frightened, scanned him frantically, taking in his rumpled clothes, the lingering shadow of terror and anger in his eyes. Beside her stood a woman Franklin didn't know. She was younger than Lisa, perhaps late 30s, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that radiated competence. Her posture was straight, her gaze intelligent and intensely focused. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the harsh light, and her expression was one of contained fury mixed with professional assessment. This was Eleanor Price. Dad! Lisa rushed forward, tears welling, pulling him into a fierce hug that nearly knocked the wind out of him. Franklin held her tight, feeling her tremble. The simple human contact, the scent of his daughter's familiar perfume, was a lifeline thrown into the storm. Are you okay? What happened? They wouldn't tell me anything. Over Lisa's shoulder, Franklin's eyes met Eleanor Price's. Her gaze was steady, probing. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I'm Eleanor Price. Lisa contacted me through the Justice Project. Can you tell me exactly what happened? From the beginning. Leave nothing out. They were ushered into a small, windowless interview room. Cold metal table, hard plastic chairs, the ubiquitous buzzing fluorescent. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and despair. Franklin sat, Lisa clutching his hand tightly. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting thin and metallic. Then he began. He spoke slowly at first, finding the words, reliving the golden hour turning to nightmare. The peaceful errand, the hummed tune, the sudden approach. He described Dalton's aggressive posture, the invasion of space, the barked commands, the spilled slippers, the blatant lie about a theft report and matching description. He recounted the disbelief, the pleas ignored, the deliberate roughness with the handcuffs, the wrenching pain in his shoulders, the humiliation of being shoved towards the car, the discarded slippers. He repeated Dalton's radio call verbatim. Asterisk resisted initially, but secured. Asterisk, the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He mentioned Officer Carter's silent presence, the averted gaze. He pulled the crumpled receipt from his pocket, the small, fragile rectangle of paper that proved his innocence regarding the slippers. He placed it on the cold metal table like a sacred object. Eleanor Price listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She didn't interrupt, only nodded occasionally, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. She took meticulous notes. When Franklin finished, the room felt heavy with the weight of his story. "That receipt is crucial, Mr. Vance," Eleanor stated, her voice low and firm. "It directly contradicts any claim you stole the slippers." "But Dalton's lie about resistance, that's dangerous. He's creating a narrative to justify his actions." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "We need the mall security footage. Immediately. From the store, showing your purchase, and, crucially, from the parking lot showing the entire interaction." Franklin felt a flicker of hope, quickly doused by fear. "Will they give it to us? The police?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "They might try to stall or lose it, especially if they're protecting Dalton. That's why we move fast. We file a formal complaint immediately. We demand preservation of all evidence. The footage, the patrol car dash cam, Dalton's body cam footage if he was wearing one." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Franklin's. "Mr. Vance, they charge you with petty theft and resisting arrest, based entirely on Dalton's false report. We can get the theft charge dismissed easily with this receipt and the store footage. But the resisting arrest charge, that's Dalton's shield. We need the video evidence to shatter it, to show the world what really happened." Lisa gasped. "Resisting? Dad would never." "I know. Honey," Franklin said, squeezing her hand. He looked back at Eleanor, the cold fury solidifying into resolve. "What do? We fight," Eleanor stated simply, the word resonating in the sterile room. "We fight with the truth. We expose Dalton. We sue the department for false arrest, excessive force, and malicious prosecution. We clear your name completely." But she paused, her gaze unwavering. "It will be hard. The system protects its own. They will push back. Dalton will lie. They might try to intimidate you. Are you prepared for that, Mr. Vance? Are you ready to go through the fire?" Franklin looked at his daughter's tear-streaked face, filled with love and fear. He thought of Clara. He thought of the slippers on the asphalt. He thought of the cold steel around his wrists. The humming spiritual tune rose faintly in his memory, not as peace, but as a call to battle. The quiet man who believed in patience was gone. In his place sat someone forged in the crucible of injustice. He met Eleanor Price's fierce gaze. His voice, when it came, was low, steady, and carried the weight of a vow. "Ma'am, they already put me through the fire. Now, it's my turn to make sure they feel the heat. I'm ready. Let's fight." The battle lines were drawn, not in the parking lot, but in this cold, buzzing room. The path to the courtroom was opening, paved with evidence, legal strategy, and a grandfather's unyielding fury. The crucible had begun its work. The sterile interview room felt charged now, not just with buzzing fluorescence, but with the crackling energy of a plan set in motion. Eleanor Price moved with the swift, decisive precision of a general marshaling forces. Franklin Vance's simple receipt, lying on the cold metal table, was no longer just proof of purchase. It was the first flag planted on the battlefield. Eleanor pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "Lisa," she said, her voice sharp but calm, "take your father home. Get him fed, get him rested. He needs to be strong. I'll handle the immediate legal firestorm here." She turned her laser focus to Franklin. "Do not speak to anyone from the police department without me present. Not a word. If they call, if they show up, refer them to me." "Understood." Franklin nodded, the gravity settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat, but this time it was the weight of purpose, not just despair. Lisa helped him up, her arm a steady anchor. Eleanor didn't watch them leave. She was already striding towards the precinct's front desk, radiating an authority that made the board sergeant look up warily. "Eleanor Price, attorney for Franklin Vance," she announced, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the station. "I am here to formally demand the immediate preservation of all evidence related to my client's arrest. This includes, but is not limited to, all security footage from Eastfield Mall covering the shoe store interior and the parking lot exits in Section B, 7 from approximately 4:30 p.m. to 5:15 p.m. today. It also includes the dash cam footage from Patrol Unit 7 for the same time period, and crucially, Officer Dalton's body-worn camera footage, if he was equipped." She slid a pre-prepared letter across the counter. "This is a formal request and notice of spoliation. If any of this evidence is lost, corrupted, or accidentally erased, I will consider it deliberate obstruction of justice and ground for severe sanctions against this department." The sergeant blinked, momentarily flustered by the barrage. Eleanor didn't wait for a response. "I also need to see the arrest report filed by Officer Dalton. Now, please." Her tone brooked no argument. Back at Franklin's modest, well-kept bungalow, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of tension. Lisa fussed, making tea she knew her father wouldn't drink, straightening cushions that didn't need straightening. The familiar surroundings, photos of Clara, of Lisa's graduation, Franklin's worn armchair, felt strangely fragile, violated by the day's events. Franklin sat at the small kitchen table, the crumpled receipt smoothed out before him. The image of Dalton's sneering face wouldn't leave him. The phantom ache in his shoulders where the cuffs had bitten flared anew. The humiliation, the helplessness, threatened to swamp him again. He closed his eyes, not to shut out the world, but to focus. He heard Clara's voice, not whispering comfort, but whispering strength. Asterisk, fight, Franklin. Fight clean, fight hard. Asterisk, he opened his eyes, the simmering anger crystallizing into cold resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every person Dalton had ever targeted. For every moment of dignity stolen. He picked up his landline phone, his hand steady now, and dialed the number Eleanor had scribbled on a card, the Justice Project. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Rick Dalton wasn't celebrating. He sat in a dimly lit bar, nursing a beer that tasted sour. The smug satisfaction from the parking lot had curdled into a low-grade anxiety. The arrival of that lawyer, Price, he knew her reputation. A pit bull for civil rights cases. And she was connected to the Justice Project? Trouble. He replayed the arrest in his mind, justifying his actions. Asterisk, old guy was acting shifty. Didn't comply immediately. Probably was stealing something else. Asterisk, but the absence of any actual stolen goods gnawed at him. The receipt. That damn receipt. And Carter. Carter had looked sick the whole time. Weak link. Dalton slammed his fist softly on the bar, making the glasses rattle. He couldn't let this old man ruin his career, his reputation. He needed leverage. Pressure. He needed Franklin Vance to fold, to accept a plea, to go away. An idea, ugly and familiar, formed in his mind. 2 days later, the storm clouds gathered visibly. Eleanor called Franklin, her voice tight. "Good news and bad, Mr. Vance." "The theft charge? Gone. Dropped like a hot potato. The store manager confirmed your purchase. The register tape matched your receipt, and the interior mall footage shows you paying." They had no leg to stand on. A small, hard-won victory. "The bad news," Eleanor continued, the steel returning to her voice, "is the resisting arrest charge. They're sticking to it." Dalton doubled down in his supplemental report. Claims you stiffened, pulled away, and used abusive language before he secured you. Franklin snorted, a sound of pure disgust. "Lies. All lies. That's not all," Eleanor said, her voice dropping lower. "The precinct is unable to locate the parking lot security footage covering your arrest zone for that specific time block. Technical glitch, they claim." Franklin's heart sank. "And the dash cam?" he asked, dreading the answer. Unit 7's dash cam was malfunctioning that afternoon. No recording. Eleanor's anger was palpable even through the phone. "Dalton's body cam?" He claims he forgot to activate it. Convenient. Franklin felt the walls closing in. No footy. Dalton's word against his. The system closing ranks. So, it's a story against mine? The vulnerability threatened to return. Not quite. Eleanor countered, a fierce note returning. We have witnesses. Shoppers saw what happened. We've already identified 2 from the scene who were willing to give statements to the Justice Project investigator. They saw no resistance, only your compliance. They saw Dalton's aggression. And, she paused for effect, we have Officer Carter. Carter. Franklin remembered the young cop's averted gaze. Will he talk? He might not want to, Eleanor admitted. But he's key. He was there. He saw everything. If he breaks ranks, if he tells the truth, that could be her silver bullet. We're pursuing that angle aggressively. But Dalton knows that too. He'll be putting pressure on Carter. The pressure came to Franklin's doorstep that very evening. Lisa had gone home briefly. Franklin was alone, trying to read a newspaper, but seeing only Dalton's face on the page. A heavy knock rattled the front door. Not Lisa's light tap. Franklin's blood ran cold. He peered through the peephole. Officer Rick Dalton stood on his porch, out of uniform but radiating menace in a leather jacket. No partner. Alone. Franklin's hand trembled on the lock. Should he open it? Eleanor's warning screamed in his mind. Don't speak to them without me. But Dalton knocked again, harder, more insistent. Franklin took a deep breath, steeling himself. He wouldn't hide in his own home. He opened the door, just a crack, the chain lock firmly in place. Dalton's face was a mask of false concern that didn't reach his cold eyes. Mr. Vance, just wanted to check in, see how you were holding up. His voice was oily, insincere. I'm fine, officer, Franklin said, his voice carefully neutral, holding the door tight. My lawyer has advised me not to discuss the case. Dalton's smile tightened. Lawyers, they complicate things, don't they? Cost a fortune, too. Look, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt like a threat. This whole thing, it's gotten blown way out of proportion. A misunderstanding. You know how these things go. Courts are messy, draining, especially for a man your age. He let the implication hang old, weak, vulnerable. We'll be ashamed to drag it out, causing your daughter all that stress. He glanced pointedly towards the photos visible in the hallway. The implied threat to Lisa was unmistakable. Maybe we can just make this go away? You accept a small plea on the resisting charge. A fine, maybe some community service, no jail time. And we all move on. Clean slate. Save everyone a lot of trouble. His eyes bored into Franklin's, demanding compliance. Franklin felt a fresh wave of fury, hotter and purer than before. This man had humiliated him, lied about him, and now stood on his porch trying to intimidate him in his silence, trying to use his daughter. The quiet man was gone. Franklin straightened up to his full height, looking Dalton directly in the eye. The fear was still there, but it was drowned out by righteous anger. Officer Dalton, Franklin said, his voice surprisingly strong and clear, cutting through the tense evening air. You put handcuffs on an innocent man. You lied on a police report. You came to my home to threaten me. There will be no plea. There will be no moving on. My lawyer, Ms. Price, will be very interested to hear about this visit. He saw a flicker of surprise, then anger, flash in Dalton's eyes. Now, Franklin continued, his hand gripping the edge of the door, I believe you know the way out. Before Dalton could respond, Franklin slammed the door shut, engaging the deadbolt with a satisfyingly loud click. He leaned against the door, his heart pounding, not just with adrenaline, but with a fierce, defiant pride. He had faced the bully and hadn't flinched. The storm wasn't just gathering. It was here, and Franklin Vance was no longer just weathering it. He was standing squarely in its path, ready for the fight. The path to the courtroom was no longer just a possibility. It was a battleground, and the first skirmish had just been won on his own doorstep. The fire within him burned brighter than ever. The trial loomed, a crucible where truth would finally meet power. The slam of Franklin Vance's front door, echoing in the quiet suburban street, wasn't just the sound of wood hitting frame. It was the sound of defiance detonating. Officer Rick Dalton stood frozen for a second on the porch, the false concern on his face replaced by raw, livid shock, quickly morphing into a snarl of pure rage. The old man had slammed the door on him, threatened him with his lawyer. Dalton's fist clenched, knuckles white against the worn leather of his jacket. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He turned, stomping back to his unmarked car, the engine roaring to life with unnecessary fury, tires squealing as he sped away. Inside the bungalow, Franklin leaned heavily against the door, the adrenaline surge making his hands tremble violently now. He hadn't flinched. He'd stood his ground. The fear was still a cold stone in his gut, but it was outweighed by a fierce, trembling pride and a white-hot anger that burned away the last vestiges of helplessness. He immediately called Eleanor Price, his voice tight but steady as he recounted Dalton's brazen intimidation attempt. Eleanor's response was ice-cold fury. "That's witness tampering and intimidation, Mr. Vance. Pure and simple. We're adding it to the complaint. Every action he takes digs his hole deeper." The battlefield was expanding. The weeks leading to the trial were a relentless pressure cooker. The resisting arrest charge, Dalton's shield, remained stubbornly in place. The missing mall footage, the conveniently malfunctioning dashcam, Dalton's forgotten body cam. The walls of silence within the precinct seemed impenetrable. Franklin felt the weight of the system pushing down, trying to grind him in his silent submission. Anonymous, vaguely threatening, calls started coming late at night, heavy breathing on the line before a click. Franklin stopped answering unknown numbers, his landline feeling like a conduit for poison. Lisa worried constantly, jumping at shadows, her fear a constant ache in Franklin's heart. But he refused to bend. He met with Eleanor and her investigators, recounting every detail of the arrest and the porch confrontation until it was etched into his soul. He focused on Clara's imagined strength, on the discarded slippers that symbolized everything stolen. He was fighting for more than himself now. He was fighting for the right to simply be without fear in a parking lot. Then a crack in the wall. Eleanor called, her voice crackling with controlled excitement. "We found her, Mr. Vance." Mrs. Gable. Eleanor explained how persistent Justice Project investigators, canvassing the mall parking lot weeks after the fact, had finally tracked down a crucial witness, an elderly woman who'd been sitting in her car nearby, waiting for her husband. She'd seen the entire arrest unfold. She'd been terrified to come forward initially, fearing police retaliation, but the investigators' persistence and assurances of anonymity through the Justice Project had finally convinced her. Her signed statement was damning. She described Franklin's calm demeanor, Dalton's aggressive approach from the very beginning, the spilled slippers, Franklin's clear attempts to cooperate and show his receipt, the complete absence of any resistance before the handcuffs snapped shut, and Dalton's unnecessary roughness. It was a direct, eyewitness refutation of Dalton's resisting lie. Hope, fragile but bright, flickered in Franklin's chest. The pressure on Ben Carter intensified. Dalton, increasingly cornered and paranoid, leaned hard on his rookie partner. Rumors swirled at the precinct. Carter was unreliable, soft, maybe even involved somehow. Dalton made veiled threats about careers ending before they started. Carter became a ghost, pale and withdrawn, avoiding everyone. Eleanor knew he was the linchpin. Carter had been right there. If he broke, the Justice Project applied its own pressure legally. Carter was subpoenaed. Ignoring it meant contempt of court. Testifying meant choosing a side. The young officer was trapped in a vice of his own making. The day of the trial dawned gray and heavy, the sky threatening rain. The county courthouse loomed, a monolith of imposing stone and echoing corridors, smelling of old paper, floor polish, and simmering anxiety. Franklin, dressed in his best suit, the one he'd worn to Clara's funeral, walked beside Eleanor Price, her presence a solid rock in the swirling tension. Lisa held his other arm, her grip tight. Reporters milled outside. The case had garnered quiet local attention, a story of an elderly man versus the police. Franklin kept his head high, ignoring the cameras, focusing on the heavy oak doors ahead. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick and still. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, presided from the high bench. The prosecutor, a young man Franklin didn't know, looked confident, almost bored. Officer Dalton sat stiffly beside another department lawyer, his jaw clenched, radiating hostility. His eyes, when they flicked to Franklin, were pure venom. Franklin met his gaze squarely, the memory of the porch confrontation lending him strength. He saw Ben Carter slip into the back, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The prosecution presented its flimsy case. Dalton's official report detailing the fabricated theft call and Franklin's alleged resistance. Dalton took the stand, his voice overly loud, his posture rigidly correct. He painted a picture of a suspicious, uncooperative Franklin who stiffened and became verbally abusive when questioned, forcing Dalton to take control. He lied smoothly, confidently, weaving his narrative of justified force. The prosecutor led him gently, reinforcing the fiction. Franklin listened, his hands clenched in his lap, the injustice burning like acid. When it was Eleanor's turn for cross-examination, the atmosphere shifted palpably. She approached the stand slowly, a predator assessing its prey. "Officer Dalton," she began, her voice deceptively calm. "You testified that Mr. Vance stiffened and pulled away when you attempted to detain him. Could you demonstrate exactly how he stiffened? Which muscles? Which direction did he pull?" Her questions were precise, surgical. Dalton floundered, his description becoming vague, contradictory. She pressed him on the theft, why no report number was ever filed by mall security, why no stolen items were ever recovered, why the description miraculously matched a man buying slippers. Dalton grew defensive, his answers clipped, his temper starting to show. Eleanor introduced Franklin's receipt, the store manager's testimony confirming the purchase, the timestamp register log. She meticulously dismantled the theft allegation, exposing it as the lie it was. Then, she moved in for the kill. "Officer, isn't it true that on the evening of date, you visited Mr. Vance at his private residence while off duty?" Dalton froze. I want to check on his well-being," he stammered. "Check on his well-being?" Eleanor's voice dripped with skepticism. She produced a copy of Franklin's sworn affidavit detailing the encounter. "Mr. Vance states you pressured him to accept a plea deal on the resisting charge, implying it would be easier on him and his daughter. He states you threatened him, Officer Dalton, intimidated him in his own home. Did you, or did you not, tell Mr. Vance it would be a shame to cause his daughter stress and suggest he make this go away?" Dalton's face flushed crimson. "That's a lie. He's twisting my words. I was being conciliatory." "Conciliatory?" Eleanor's voice rose slightly, cutting through the courtroom. "By visiting a defendant you arrested, alone, off duty, at his home, to discuss his case without his attorney present? Isn't that a direct violation of department policy? Isn't that, Officer Dalton, witness intimidation?" The accusation hung heavy. Dalton sputtered, looking towards his department lawyer, who was suddenly very interested in his notes. The judge's eyes narrowed. Eleanor wasn't finished. She called Mrs. Gable. The elderly woman, nervous but resolute, took the stand. In a clear, trembling voice, she recounted what she saw: Dalton's aggression, Franklin's compliance, the absence of resistance. Her simple, honest testimony was devastating. It painted Dalton not as an officer in control, but as an aggressor manufacturing a charge. Finally, Eleanor called Ben Carter. The young officer looked like he might faint. He took the oath, his voice barely a whisper. The prosecutor tried a half-hearted direct, but Carter's answers were evasive, mumbled. Then Eleanor stood. She didn't attack. She spoke quietly, almost gently. "Officer Carter, you were there that day. You witnessed the arrest of Franklin Vance from start to finish. Before any lawyers, before any reports, in that parking lot. What did you actually see?" She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Did you see Mr. Vance resist Officer Dalton in any way? Did you hear him use abusive language? Did you see him stiffen or pull away before the handcuffs were applied. Carter looked down at his hands, clenched in his lap. He looked at Dalton, whose glare was a physical force. He looked at Franklin, sitting straight and dignified. He looked at the judge. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, thick enough to choke on. Seconds ticked by like hours. Then, Ben Carter took a ragged breath. His voice, when it came, was low but clear, cutting through the tense silence like a knife. "No, ma'am," he said, his eyes fixed on his knees. "I didn't." "Mr. Vance," he was calm. He tried to show Officer Dalton his receipt. He put his hands behind his back when ordered. He didn't resist. He didn't say anything abusive. He swallowed hard. Officer Dalton, he was angry from the start. He lied about the theft call. He was rougher than he needed to be. Carter's admission, forced out by the sheer weight of truth and his own crumbling conscience, landed like a thunderclap. Dalton shot up from his seat, face purple with rage. "He's lying. Traitor." The judge's gavel cracked down hard, once, twice. "Order. Officer Dalton, control yourself, or you will be removed." The dam had broken. The rest was a formality. Eleanor's closing argument was a scalpel, dissecting the lies, highlighting Carter's reluctant truth, Mrs. Gable's clarity, the intimidation attempt, the conveniently missing evidence. She painted a picture not of a resisting suspect, but of a racist cop abusing his power and a system scrambling to cover it up. The prosecutor's closing sounded hollow, desperate. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The tension in the courtroom as the jury filed back in was electric, a physical hum in the air. Franklin held Lisa's hand so tightly their knuckles were white. Dalton sat rigid, staring straight ahead, a statue of defiance slowly cracking. The foreperson stood. "On the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant, Franklin Vance, not guilty." The words rang out, clear and final. A gasp, then a murmur swept the room. Lisa burst into tears, hugging her father. Franklin closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. Not guilty. The shackles, real and imagined, fell away. The roar of truth had finally silenced the lie. But Franklin Vance wasn't done. The criminal trial cleared his name. The civil trial against Officer Dalton and the Eastfield Police Department sought justice. Armed with the verdict, Carter's testimony, Mrs. Gable's account, and the evidence of intimidation, Eleanor Price unleashed the full force of the law. The department, facing undeniable proof of misconduct and a cover-up, settled swiftly before trial for a substantial sum. Compensation for the humiliation, the trauma, the violation of Franklin's rights. Dalton, exposed and abandoned by the system he'd manipulated, was fired. Internal investigations were launched. His career in law enforcement was over. Franklin Vance walked out of the courthouse for the last time, not into the fading golden light of a parking lot nightmare, but into the clear light of a hard-won morning. The settlement money wasn't about wealth. It was an acknowledgement of wrong, a tangible symbol of victory. He donated a large portion to the Justice Project in Clara's name, ensuring others would have the fierce advocate he'd found in Eleanor Price. He bought a new pair of slippers, better ones, and walked through the Eastfield Mall parking lot, head held high, a quiet hum of an old spiritual tune back on his lips. Not a sound of peace, but a song of resilience. He'd learned a harsh lesson. That prejudice wears a uniform too, and justice isn't given. It's demanded, fought for, and roared into existence by those who refuse to be silenced. The roar of truth, Franklin knew, echoing in the chambers of power and in the quiet corners of ordinary lives, is the only sound that can truly shatter the chains of injustice. His fight was over, but the echo of his victory, a testament to the courage of one ordinary man, would resonate long after.